So Jacob finally meets with Esau. After much anticipation, they finally meet. And if you remember, Jacob fled the land of Canaan to escape from Esau because Esau wanted to kill Jacob. And now, after more than 20 years, Jacob and Esau meet again and are face to face. We saw in the previous chapter last week that Jacob was afraid and distressed at the news that Esau and his 400 men were on their way to meet Jacob. And Jacob thought for sure that Esau was coming to kill him and his family. Verse 1 says again, "Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming. With him were 400 men." So he can, see Esau and his men coming, off on the horizon. And so Jacob divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 maidservants. And he put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. When Jacob sees Esau coming with the 400 men, a very large army, and that day he divides his family up into 3 groups, between Leah, Rachel, and the 2 maidservants, and then he arranges them in order by their groups, placing the maidservants with their children in the front, then Leah with her children, and then finally Rachel and her only child, Joseph, last. Rachel is the one that Jacob loved, right? She's the one that he wanted to marry. He ended up with the others. That wasn't his choice. He got tricked into that. But Rachel is the one that he loves and wanted to marry. And he shows his preference for Rachel by putting Rachel and Joseph last, where they would be the safest. There was no question where you stood in Jacob's household. I mean, he just put them in order from least to greatest here. You can tell who's Jacob's favorite. Wonder who Dad likes the most, kind of thing. Well, it's obvious just by how he lines up the family. And putting Rachel and her son last was kind of a romantic gesture, I suppose. I mean, Jacob is saying to Rachel, "Of all my wives, I hope that you're killed last." Rachel probably thought, "That's the sweetest thing you've ever said to me. I love you so much. I love you, baby." This likely created problems in the family, as you can imagine, hurt feelings, jealousy. Now everybody knows how Dad really feels, how Jacob really feels. We know Joseph's brothers hated Joseph in later years, as we'll see when we get there in Genesis. But look at verse 3. As he arranges the family now in groups here and orders them. But then it says Jacob crossed over before them. Jacob crossed over before them. He went before his family. Note that, husbands. Jacob goes before his family. He is leading his family, literally. Husbands, God has called us to courageously lead our families. He hasn't called our wives to do that. He hasn't called us to be passive husbands who just let the wife do it and take care of it. God has commanded us to take the position at the front, at the head, and take the responsibility of leading the family. Ephesians 5 says, "Husbands, love your wives just as Christ also loved the church and gave himself for her." How did Christ demonstrate his love for his bride, the church? By dying for the church, by laying down his life as a sacrificial sacrifice, a substitutionary sacrifice. Dying in our place, on our behalf. And that kind of sacrificial love, that's exactly what Jacob demonstrates here. He is willing to lay down his life for his family. He puts himself as the first line of defense for his wives and children. And that's what we should do. That's being a Christ-like husband. And so verse 3, he goes before them. And then he bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Bowing was the customary greeting in the ancient Middle East, and so that's what Jacob does. He's bowing down. But look at Esau's response. Esau doesn't bow. Esau, says, hey, brothers don't bow. Brothers got a hug, And so verse 4, Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Again, not exactly the response Jacob was expecting from Esau. He was sure that Esau was coming to exact revenge. He's been dreading this day. He's been dreading this meeting. Often the buildup in our minds is worse than what actually happens, isn't it? Or we can build something up in our minds and we just naturally think of the worst case scenario of how it's going to play out, the worst thing's going to happen. And we dread it and we get ourselves sick over it. We're worried, we're losing sleep, and then the thing comes and it's not at all like what we thought. And we've wrestled with this thing, and it's nothing like what we thought. Here's Jacob. He's sure that Esau is coming to kill him. He knows it. And he's bringing 400 men to wipe him out and wipe out his whole family. And this is it. This is where we're going to meet our end. This is where we're going to die. We're going to die here. My whole family's going to die. We're not going to survive this. How often do we think that way? As Don McClure says, we've all died 1,000 times. And yet we're all still here. We've all had occasions where we thought, this is it. This is the end. We're never going to recover. We're never going to get it back. And it works out. It works out. And so often the reality is so much better than what we expected it to be. Or actually, Esau wasn't coming to kill Jacob and his family. He was coming to greet them, welcome them home. And Jacob's shocked, I'm sure. He didn't expect this. And so again, Esau embraces him. They weep together as brothers. And Jacob says, thanks for not killing me. I appreciate that. And so clearly Esau's heart towards Jacob has changed with the passage of time. He's not angry anymore. He's not bitter anymore. Doesn't want to kill him. Esau's response here to Jacob, it reminds me of the father's response in the story of the prodigal son when his son finally comes home. Remember, the son is same feelings. He's so worried about how his dad's going to receive him. Will his dad receive him? Will his dad just allow him to be a servant in his household? And then when the son arrives, the father sees him afar off. And it says in Luke 15, verse 20, when his father saw him, the father had compassion on his son. The father ran and fell on his neck and kissed him and received him home. And the son, remember, starts into that speech that he had rehearsed. I've sinned against you and I've sinned against God. You'll just let me be a servant in your house. And the father just interrupts him and says, put sandals on his feet, put a ring on his finger, put a robe on him, kill the fatted calf. My son who is lost has been found. My son who was dead is alive again. My boy is home. And by the way, that is God's heart toward us. That's God's heart to any prodigal son or daughter, any prodigal man or woman who's away from the Lord. When you come back to the Lord, God rejoices that you come back. He's not angry. He rejoices when you return home to Him. He's just glad you're home when you come home.